When Good Morning Britain interrupts programming with a red breaking news banner to announce the Prime Minister is going on TikTok to talk about ground rent caps, and the public response is to call him a liar and complain about insignificant policy while the actual landlords probably just figured out how to work around it, you know we've reached peak political cynicism. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where Charlotte Hawkins halted GMB to breathlessly announce Keir Starmer's latest policy victory, capping ground rents at £250 for leaseholders in England and Wales, and the viewing public immediately tore it apart as either too little, too late, unenforceable, or actually making things worse for people who currently pay less. We've got Starmer doing TikTok videos walking past flats talking about cost of living, we've got promises about common hold and giving homeowners control, and we've got viewers absolutely not buying any of it. This is what happens when a government's lost public trust so completely that even genuinely helpful policies get dismissed as lies and distractions. Let's break down this policy, the reaction, and why Starmer can't catch a break even when he's trying to help. So Good Morning Britain interrupted its regular programming with breaking news, complete with red banner flashing across the screen, which is the visual language of something major just happened, pay attention. Charlotte Hawkins told the audience there's breaking news this hour, building anticipation for what viewers might reasonably expect to be something genuinely significant. And then she announced ground rent caps and leasehold reform. Now, to be fair, leasehold reform is actually important to the people it affects. Britain's leasehold system is genuinely exploitative in many cases, with ground rents escalating, freeholders charging ridiculous fees for basic services, and homeowners discovering they don't actually own their homes in any meaningful sense. Reforming that system, banning new leasehold flats and giving people paths to common hold ownership is substantive policy that will materially help hundreds of thousands of people. But is it breaking news? Is it halt the program with red banner news? That's debatable, and the disconnect between the presentation and the content is part of why viewers reacted cynically. When you present something as breaking news with all the dramatic visual trappings, people expect war, economic crisis, political scandal. Getting leasehold reform instead feels anticlimactic, like the news equivalent of clickbait. Charlotte explained that new leasehold flats will be banned, and existing leaseholders will get the chance to convert to common hold, where flat owners in joint occupancy own the freehold together. That's the actual reform substance. Banning new leaseholds prevents the problem from growing. Allowing conversion to common hold gives current victims of the system a way out. Combined with the £250 ground rent cap, it's a package of reforms addressing a genuine problem. Then, Charlotte mentioned that Starmer announced this via TikTok, which is either smart modern communication or desperately trying to seem relevant to young people depending on your perspective. The show cut to a clip of Starmer walking down a street with a block of flats behind him, doing that casual political communication style where leaders pretend to spontaneously share thoughts while obviously being filmed by a professional crew. Starmer called it good news for homeowners and explained that if your ground rent is more than £250, you'll be paying less. He claimed to have spoken to many people who say this will make a difference of hundreds of pounds and tied it to cost of living being the single most important issue across the country. Then he positioned it as a promise delivered, saying he's really pleased they're delivering on that promise. That's textbook political messaging. Identify a problem, announce your solution, connect it to voters' top concern, and frame it as promise kept. It's competent communication designed to build trust and demonstrate Labour's delivering for ordinary people, except it completely failed to land with the viewing public as evidenced by the X/Twitter reactions. One viewer said, "Aye, about time too. Now let's see if they can actually enforce it, instead of just filling us with promises and leaving folks in the lurch again." That's acknowledging the policy is good while immediately questioning whether it'll actually be enforced. It's the response of someone who's been burned by political promises before and doesn't trust that announcements translate to reality. The enforcement question is legitimate. Capping ground rents is meaningless if landlords and freeholders find ways around it or simply ignore it without consequences. Does the government have the capacity and will to actually enforce this cap? Will there be penalties for violations? Will tenants have accessible mechanisms to report and challenge excessive charges? Without robust enforcement, it's just words. Another viewer wrote, "That's great, but in the grand scale of things, so insignificant." That's the political problem Starmer faces in microcosm. He announces a policy that will genuinely help hundreds of thousands of people, and the response is, yeah, but what about everything else? The policy is objectively significant to those it helps, but in the context of massive challenges like NHS crisis, cost of living, housing shortage, immigration, it feels like tinkering at the margins. A third viewer fumed, "More lies and something else proposed every other day." That's pure cynicism, not even engaging with the substance of the policy, but just assuming it's dishonest and part of a pattern of empty announcements. When you've lost public trust to this degree, it doesn't matter what you announce because people have decided you're a liar and everything you say is dismissed automatically. But here's the response that's most interesting. The average ground rent is £120 per year. I get that lots of people pay more, but does this cap mean that on average the bill will double? That's someone actually engaging with the policy detail and identifying a potential problem. If average ground rent is £120 and you cap it at £250, you've created a target for landlords currently charging less than that to raise rents up to the cap. This is the classic unintended consequence problem with price caps. If you set the cap above current average price, you risk the cap becoming the new standard rather than a ceiling. Landlords charging £100 or £150 might think, well, the law says I can charge up to £250, so I'll raise it to that level. The cap meant to protect tenants could actually result in rent increases for many. Now, there are counter-arguments. Maybe the cap is deliberately set high to avoid that problem, targeting only the most egregious exploitation. Maybe there are other provisions preventing increases for existing tenants. Maybe the government's done the analysis and decided this level balances protection against unintended consequences. But the fact a random viewer immediately identified this potential issue and the government's announcement didn't address it shows a communication failure. The TikTok delivery is interesting as a media strategy. Starmer's clearly trying to reach younger audiences who don't watch traditional broadcast news. TikTok is where millions of young people get information, so meeting them where they are makes sense. But it also risks looking desperate and inauthentic, like your dad trying to be cool by using slang he doesn't understand. The walking past flats visual is obvious political staging. Starmer's not just spontaneously walking down a street thinking about ground rents, he's doing a planned media piece with specific visual messaging. The flats in background are meant to ground the policy in reality, to show this affects real buildings where real people live, but it's so obviously staged that it undermines the casual authenticity they're trying to project. The emphasis on cost of living is connecting this narrow housing policy to voters' top concern. Starmer's trying to build a narrative that everything Labour does is about addressing cost of living, that every policy fits into that overarching mission. Ground rent caps become cost of living relief. It's coherent messaging strategy even if the public isn't buying it. The promise-delivered framing is attempting to build trust by demonstrating Labour keeps commitments. They said they would do leasehold reform, they're doing it. Therefore, they're trustworthy and deliver what they promise. Except that narrative only works if people believe you're actually delivering, rather than just announcing. And the enforcement skepticism shows many don't believe announcements equal delivery. The broader context is that Starmer's approval ratings are catastrophic, Labour's hemorrhaging support to reform and Greens, and public trust in the government is extremely low. In that environment, even good policies get dismissed as cynically because people have decided the government is failing, and everything they do is either insufficient or dishonest. Leasehold reform is genuinely good policy that's been needed for years. The system is exploitative. It traps people in arrangements that seemed reasonable when they bought, but become financially oppressive. Banning new leaseholds and capping ground rents addresses real problems affecting real people. But it's not flashy, it's not transformative, and it doesn't address the immediate crises dominating headlines. The viewer reactions show how difficult governing is when you've lost public trust. You can announce substantive, helpful policies and get called a liar. You can deliver on promises and be accused of insignificance. You can try to communicate directly via modern platforms and look desperate. There's no move that works when the public's decided you're failing. What Starmer needed from this announcement was positive coverage, grateful constituents, a sense of momentum and competence. What he got was cynicism, dismissal, and immediate criticism. That's not necessarily because the policy is bad, it's because the political environment is so toxic for Labour that nothing they do gets received positively. The GMB interruption with breaking news banner probably was a mistake because it oversold the announcement, creating expectation the policy couldn't meet. If Charlotte had just introduced it as the government's announced leasehold reform without the breaking news drama, reception might have been more proportionate. But by treating it as urgent breaking news, they invited the response of, "This is what you interrupted programming for?"